Syrian government forces have made fresh advances against foreign-backed militants around the western city of Aleppo. The army says they have taken full control of dozens of towns in the area. In a statement, they said that they will press ahead with their operations to flush out militant groups wherever they are found. Meanwhile, Syria's transport ministry said Aleppo's airport has reopened to civilian flights for the first time since its closure in 2012. The government forces have already recaptured a key highway linking Aleppo to Damascus following the Syrian army's advances in the Aleppo area. Displaced residents are finally able to go back to their homes.
It's been almost 8 years since I fled my house. It was fully furnished and had 3 bedrooms. We would be lucky if we find its doors still in place. God willing, our hope is in God. We've been walking for almost 4 or 5 kilometers. I am only carrying water and bread with me. I want to go sleep in my house, God willing. Water and bread are enough. The important thing is to have safety.
Government forces have been advancing in Idlib and Aleppo provinces for the past few weeks as they push to liberate militant-held areas. Those are the last remaining regions under the control of militants in Syria. The army began its offensive in late December and has pledged to retake all areas from the militants. Joining us for more on that is our correspondent in Damascus, Mohammed Ali, and we also have Tony Gosling, an investigative journalist, joining us from the British city of Bristol. Welcome. Now, Mohammed, if I can start with you, let's just be clear here. We're talking about the western side of Aleppo, and it is a major advance, a major gain for Damascus, for the government. Aleppo was once a major financial hub, was it not?
Yes, exactly, it was. But the most important thing is the civilians' lives at the end of the day. The Syrian army is performing its constitutional and national duty of protecting civilians' lives. And now, by securing the western and northwestern countryside of Aleppo, the Syrian army has saved the city from deadly mortar attacks that were launched by terrorists for years, killing civilians and also Syrian army and security personnel. This is why we're seeing how happy the civilians are, the residents of Idlib. They have been taken to the streets since yesterday, actually celebrating the Syrian army's victory of liberating those areas and saving the civilians from any kind of a terrorist attack. Now, also, we've been seeing how civilians who were displaced by the terrorists when they occupied their towns and villages there, they started actually to return back to check on their houses. They're eager to see what has happened to them after terrorists occupy their towns and villages. This is a normal scene, actually. Every time the Syrian army liberates a town or a village, we see the civilians who were displaced by terrorists returning back directly and normal life prevailing day after the other. Though, of course, there will be destruction. Civilians will have to rebuild their homes, but at the end of the day, it's a start for them for a normal life. Of course, this is the most important and significant development for the Syrian army in liberating those areas since the army actually liberated in 2018 eastern Al-Ghouta. Large areas, hundreds of square kilometers, have been secured, and since 2012, those terrorists have been occupying those areas. The army seems to be determined now to continue, and it is heading west towards the borderline with Turkey.
Right. And Tony, on that note, welcome to the firstly. We're seeing Syrians being very happily returning to their homes that have been liberated by Syrian government forces, not Turkish forces.
Well, it certainly wouldn't be a celebration if Turkish forces had been there. I mean, I feel like celebrating with the Syrians, actually. It's like the Allies entering Paris in 1944. Obviously, Paris is a bigger city, but it's incredibly significant to see these enormous Syrian cities now being liberated, given back to the rightful government, the elected government of Syria. We always hear on the Western television the Syrian regime, they use the word regime. Now, they use that word when they don't like the person, and they always try and ignore the fact that Syria is in fact a democracy. Okay, so they have had to have elections in Syria during wartime. during something that some would call a proxy war, others would call a civil war. But we did exactly the same here in Britain in the Second World War. We didn't stop democracy just because there was a war raging around us. And it's great to see Aleppo be liberated like this. The militants, we hear them called all sorts of things. I simply call them mercenaries, okay, that they have Wahhabist ideas in their heads. Many of them have been educated in these Wahhabist madrasas and have a particular idea of what is Islam. But this is not really Islam at all. They've been fed propaganda. And so there's half of the soul of the fighters in places like Idlib now and have been ejected from Aleppo is actually a religious one, which has been they've been misinformed deliberately on that side. But the other side, of course, is the good old-fashioned money, and that's what mercenaries normally fight for.
And Tony, these Wahhabists that you're talking about, they're very much centered in the next phase of this operation, neighboring Idlib province. These are Takfiri militants with links to Al-Qaeda. So, as well as the Syrian people celebrating their return back home, shouldn't the entire world be celebrating as well?
Well, yes, I think so. But look, Al-Qaeda, what is Al-Qaeda? What was Al-Qaeda? It was actually a confected organisation made up. In fact, the former British Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, who died in mysterious circumstances after he objected to the war in Iraq, he actually called it the base, the database, and that's what he said it was in the Guardian newspaper, if you could believe, because the Guardian wouldn't print that kind of stuff today. And
no,
Al-Qaeda...
he was on a mountain. Was he on a mountain, was he not? He was hiking on a...
Yeah, and it was very suspicious. I mean, we could go into detail on that. I don't think now is the time to do that, but it was a very suspicious death. But the fact is that the Al-Qaeda franchises around the world sprung out of something called Operation Cyclone. This was the American plan, the plot to take over Afghanistan, effectively using these paid, indoctrinated jihadists, they try to call them, but I don't use that word. I think what's happened is the word jihad has been tainted by this expression jihadist. These people, all they are is deluded mercenaries, really. And that has gone on and on. Of course, those Operation Cyclone people went on to fight in Bosnia as well, but they've all been tools of NATO intelligence services. These are the people who they're really working for. The evidence is most of the finance for these organisations quietly runs through Swiss banks. Scott Bennett has exposed a lot of that, and various other people have exposed the conduits there are for paying these people, because they're not there just because they want to be or because they believe in it. They quite often swap between one group and another group, depending on who is paying more. We don't get any of this, of course, in the UK TV or in the Western press. They just don't explain that kind of side to it. They just look at the civilian casualties in Idlib and places like that, and they never even look at the fact that it's actually the Turks that are supplying the ammunition and the weapons to the terrorists in Idlib, which are causing all these civilian casualties. Otherwise, Idlib would have probably been mopped up by now if it wasn't from NATO help, from Turkish help. And also, of course, Erdogan and the Turks want to grab territory in northern Syria. This is one of the things that these criminals in the world today that like the idea of regime change love to do. They just want to grab land. That, I'm afraid, is illegal under international law, and so that's why we need to speak out against it.
Interesting. Right. Thank you very much indeed for that, Tony. As always, I'd like to thank our guest there. Tony Gosling is an investigative journalist, and we were also joined by Mohammed Ali, our correspondent in the Syrian capital, Damascus. And thank you, dear viewers, for staying tuned to this edition of News Review.